Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a bilingual neurolinguistic programming and cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court appointed and private, marriage and relationship coaching, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one sessions in both French or English, and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550, and our website can be found at lifecoachdanamzalak.com. Today, I'm very excited to have for our fifth episode of season 26, a very special guest and author of Live Free and Hike, Finding Grace on 48 Summit, a memoir of a woman living in a very toxic relationship with a controlling husband of over 25 years. Linda Magoon found strength and resilience by climbing all of the 48 New Hampshire 4,000-foot and higher peaks. And just like all of our previous episodes, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves for a better guest. Linda, the floor is yours.
For having me, Dr. Dan. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Linda Magoon, and as you mentioned, I'm the speaker and author of a book called Live Free and Hike, Finding Grace on 48 Summits. And it's about my journey hiking these peaks in New Hampshire as a way to regain my autonomy after leaving a very toxic marriage. I was married to a very controlling husband who was jealous, insecure, quick to anger. And I basically walked on eggshells for almost 25 years, trying to stay married and stay true to my vows. And it was only after, many years and probably like one or two therapy sessions that I found the courage to leave him. I rediscovered my love of hiking shortly after leaving him because now I had the freedom to go out. I was very reluctant to go outside or to do much with friends because, as you probably know, those in controlling relationships. There's not a lot of room for any activities outside of the marriage, right? And in doing so, it meant I was selfish and I was only thinking of myself. And, it wasn't self-care. It meant I was selfish. So I rediscovered my love of hiking shortly after my divorce, and I set out to hike all of these 48 peaks. 4,000 feet doesn't sound like a lot if you have listeners that live out west, but what makes this unique in New Hampshire is that a lot of these mountains are above tree line, and the weather is very unpredictable and dangerous. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can get into trouble very quickly. So I started this journey not really knowing a lot about hiking. And in the early chapters of the book, I'm just kind of stumbling and bumbling my way through, not really wearing the right clothing. But, with each peak, I gained a little more self-confidence, and it was fun to have a goal. And I just kept climbing it throughout the 4-year period it took me to do so.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this podcast, Linda. And I know that some people, either when they go through a very, very difficult relationship, they go to drinking or the other really negative addictions. But you use actually health and fitness to be able to kind of like clear your mind from those 25 years of hell. Now, if we go back into the past a little bit, what it was this toxic marriage started in the beginning of your relationship, or it was through the years that you start seeing a very negative behavior coming from your ex-husband? And what happened throughout those years, and why didn't you cut the cord prior to that?
Yeah, all good questions. I think, like most victims of domestic violence, the person I was dating was not the person I married, right? So the person you're dating is charming, and what may be controlling, you may reframe as attentive, right? So yes, the jealousy started right after we were married, and in the classic domestic violence situation, it started by isolating from friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
As you probably know, and it wasn't, it's very subtle, and he was never physically violent about it. but at the same time, I was expected to spend all of my time with him.
Well, this is a very common behavior of narcissistic personalities, and I think he was definitely a malignant narcissist. And I'm sure that a lot of our listeners here on the podcast actually are experiencing very, very similar situation at this moment. So I think your story will definitely allow them or give them the courage to be able to kind of step back. But unfortunately for narcissistic, Linda, it's after you divorce them, the battle is not over. It's always, they will still find a way to be able to destroy you in some which way or another. They will try to still keep control or some form of control. So is that something that you've experienced as well after leaving him?
Interestingly, not really, because he was a bully, right? And once you confront bullies and stand up to bullies, they they stand back and they stand down. I no longer have any contact with my ex-husband, and the reason for that is because shortly after we were divorced, less than a year after we were divorced, I woke up and turned on the news and found out that he had been arrested and charged with multiple counts of child molestation. So that started a whole new journey for me. Just as I was gaining my autonomy and making new friends and going out, I now had to somehow cope with these horrendous crimes that he had been charged with. Obviously, I had no idea what he was doing. These crimes were committed, many of them while I was married. I had no idea, and so that was a 3-year journey of shock, of anger, grief, sadness, and uncertainty throughout the criminal process. Because as you probably know, a family member or an ex-family member in a criminal trial, it doesn't really have any standing, right? I wasn't a victim, so I didn't have any victim services, but I didn't know who to turn to. It was a very isolating, very experience in which I couldn't find any supports because it was so unrelatable. And so like hiking these peaks helped me cope with all of that. For a day, I could kind of forget about what the next headline was going to be in the paper because that would always throw me because not being a party to the case, I had no idea what was going to come next. And it always made the newspaper headline. At the time, it made national news. It was on every newspaper. And there were 3 trials in all, and as they unfolded, I gradually learned coping skills and learned how to call the court in advance to know when the next court date or the next process was, so I would be ready for the news or the media.
But was there any negative repercussion to those allegations? Because if you were still married with him at that time, did they say that you were an accomplice to the charges?
I'm concerned that our house was going to be searched, because I had left and he was still in the house, but I still had stuff there, and so I was concerned that I was going, that our house was going to be searched. It never was because these crimes did not take place it took place where he worked. So I was never contacted by the prosecution. I was never contacted by the defense. I couldn't help either side because I didn't know anything. But there's also the stigma, the shame, the shock, and I found myself going through the stages of grief. I was lucky that I was engaged with a good therapist at the time, and I also reconnected with a life coach that I had met shortly after my divorce, who helped me, plot out this goal of hiking the 4,000 footers and writing a book about it. But the entire criminal process took about 3 years, which is how long I took to climb these mountains. It was 3 trials, 3 appeals, multiple victims, and he's serving a life sentence in prison. And I no longer have contact with him because it doesn't serve me to do so.
Absolutely. For
Mm.
25 years and not being aware of what was going on. I mean, he found a good way to hide it. And so yeah, this they do have very, very special skills, those narcissistic people, in hiding the truth or bending the truth. So I'm very, very glad that you actually got out of it unscarred. So kudos to you for that, Linda. But when it comes to um, the climbing part, I mean, there's so many other things that you could have done when it comes to like coping skills. So why the hiking? And did you climb them during the winter month as well? Because in New Hampshire, this is not a joke. I mean, we're talking about cold weather.
Dr. Dan. So how did I find hiking? I had always liked the outdoors. I just never had the opportunity to really enjoy it because I was married to somebody who did not like the outdoors in the way that I did. So shortly after I was divorced, I was just happened to be driving by this beautiful mountain in New Hampshire called Mount Moosilauke. And I had always wanted to hike it, and I thought, you know what, let's do this. Why not? And so one August day, I hiked the mountain all by myself, and it was such a almost a spiritual awakening. It was such a the hills are alive moment. I almost broke out into song. It was just so beautiful being on a summit, walking above tree line. It was a really a connection with myself and a higher power. And it was only after I got home and was rereading about the hike in a guidebook that I discovered these other 47 mountains that I could hike. And it's kind of a thing. It's very popular in New Hampshire. If you do it, you would get a little patch and a little certificate, and you belong to a club. So it's much like hiking the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail. It's very much a thing in New Hampshire. If your dog does it, they get their own patch. So it's kind of cool. You asked if I did it in the winter, and yes, I did. I was very strategic about it. I tried to, look at the weather forecast, hike the summits that were not above tree line so I could stay safe. I did run into trouble on a mountain called Mount Madison above tree line when it was extremely windy, and it knocked me over and almost like tore my pants off. And I thought, you know what? This mountain will be here. Why am I climbing it in January when I can climb it in July? And so that kind of ended my desire to do any winter hiking. But by that time, I was almost done. So yes, I did do some mountains, but I tried to be very smart about it and make good decisions and hike those that were kind of in the trees and weren't exposed to the elements. But yeah, New Hampshire's winters are a big thing.
Winter starts in October and ends in June, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Give take.
And then it starts in September.
Yeah, exactly. That's correct. So did you have like did you do it with any other friends or people that wanted to be able to experience the same as you, or you all did it solo?
Yeah. So when I was married, I was not very good at communicating. Like nobody knew what I was going through. I was very good at keeping my mouth shut. I think my mom suspected something towards the latter. She's now passed, but she at least saw me divorced and into a new home. And unfortunately, she didn't live to see me climb all of those peaks. But I was very quiet and didn't. We're from hardy Polish stock, and we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and just forge on. So I didn't tell a lot of people about it. And so when I started these hikes, I didn't tell a lot of people about it. I didn't want to be judged. I didn't want people to think that, what's this old lady in her mid-50s doing this? She should be driving a red sports car and engaging all this nefarious behavior. And gradually, I started telling people, just like I started telling people that I was no longer married, and it got easier and easier. So for some of the harder peaks, like some of these hikes, a long day hikers can go like 16 miles. I did it with a group or some coworkers who had done it before, and so there's an element of safety in that. But I would say the majority of them I did alone, only because it was, hiking was dependent on the weather, dependent on my work schedule, and so it was very hard to line up people to go with the weather. I want to do this, the logistics of it. So a lot of times I just went by myself, and I was fine. You usually meet other people on the trail that are alone too, and a lot of times that's what I would do. I would meet up with some retirees or some folks just out for the day, and we would end up hiking together, which always made it nice. Yeah.
So what was the highest peak that you climbed? I mean, the 4,000 was the lowest, but what was the highest?
Right. Yeah, great question. The highest peak here in New Hampshire is Mount Washington, and it's a little over 6,000 feet. It's known for the world's worst weather, and the highest wind gust ever recorded by a human is on Mount Washington. It's 231 miles per hour.
Well, how can you climb that? It's
Yeah,
impossible.
well, you don't climb it on that day, but routinely the winds are above 100 miles an hour, only because it's at the confluence of like two or three jet streams, and so the weather up there is very unpredictable. It's very harsh. A couple people were just rescued a few weeks ago from Mount Washington. They were seasoned and well experienced and well equipped, but you can get into trouble very quickly when the snow is, chest deep and your snowshoes aren't functioning like they should. Then it doesn't take much for bad things to happen. So yeah, that was the highest is Mount Washington. It is interesting because it's also there's a train that goes up there. There's an auto road that can go up there during the summer months. So when you get to the top, you're rewarded with a gift shop and a little museum, and you can buy an ice cream, you can buy a hot dog, and then you can start your way down. So it's a little unique. It's a very much treasured state park here in New Hampshire.
And no one will venture Mount Washington during the winter because it's not really, I mean, this is not a wise decision to make, especially with the winds.
People do hike it quite a bit, and if you're well prepared and you're in shape and you're knowledgeable about winter hiking, then it definitely can be done. I don't encourage it though. It's just there's no room for error. Winter hiking is very much different than the summer months, only because daylight is in short supply for one thing. The weather can turn rapidly. Once you lose your use of your hands, you're pretty much dead. Really, quite frankly, cell service is spotty and unpredictable. If you do call and would like to be rescued, it's probably going to be an 8 to 12 hour wait, because it takes that long for rescuers to group up, gather up their equipment and come out and locate you, and then they have to bring you down. It is a long wait if you need rescuing. Yeah.
But to what level in feet that you start having difficulty breathing? I mean, at 6,000 feet is perfectly fine. But I mean, after above that, did you start, because also you're exercising, you're climbing, and what is the elevation on most mountains there?
So the White Mountains are between 4 and many are at 5,000 feet. And like I said, Mount Washington's about 6,200 feet. There's really no there's no lack of oxygen to be concerned with. The only huffing and puffing you do is going up the trail, because the change in elevation is so dramatic. Some of these trails are older; they go straight up. New Hampshire is known as the Granite State, so unlike hiking out west where the trails are pretty well maintained, out here in New Hampshire, you're climbing over rocks. It's just rock, Mount Washington is known as the rock pile, and so these rocks is not a joke. It's a different type of hike for sure, and it's been called the toughest part of the Appalachian Trail.
And then so you completed those 48 summits in, like you said, 3 or 4 years. So this is approximately what, give and take, it's how many did you do comfortably per year?
Obviously, with my ex-husband's arrest, that really threw me quite a bit and set me back, only because I had to deal with a lot of personal things. There were some days when I couldn't get out of bed, especially after he had made the news, or some new fact came out about the case. So that definitely set me back quite a bit. But at the same time, having this goal was also a reason to get out of bed. I really credit it, along with a good therapist and a good life coach, with keeping me from going into like a depression, deep depression, because it was a reason to get out of bed. It was a reason to move forward and hike these mountains, and something to concentrate on. And as you know, just being in nature, just walking in nature, even if it's just walking to your mailbox, and you sort of exercise, especially outside, it's just so good for it helps you with your sleep, it helps with your anxiety, and it was just a way to cope with the just intense grief that I felt. I never was really angry. People were like, "Oh, I would have been angry and burned his car," and I just never was angry. I was just very, very sad, and I spent a lot of time trying to piece together the timeline. Like, what did I miss? What did I miss? Where was I during all of these allegations? Why, and also spent a lot of time wondering why he did this. And I have to just live with the fact that I'll never know.
Hmm. And you said that all this happened when he was at work. So what kind of work did he do?
So this is, I mean, this is classic. I mean, this is, classic grooming behavior. He was somebody who was trusted by the community. He went out of great lengths to be like the pillar of the community, and he worked in a community center in which school-age children, would gather there before they went to school, before the bus picked them up, before they went to school. So it was like maybe
Okay.
age 5 to 6 to like, yeah, 9 or something like that. So that's when that took place, is during his tenure there at the community center. Yep.
And then how long, I mean, after did you start realizing in the timeline that you fabricated, when did all this start to happen? Was it like 10 years after you got married, 15 years, 20 years, or was it all through the time that once you were since engaged all the way to your divorce?
Yeah, interestingly, from what all I can tell you is what I read in the paper, right? Because he's not going to tell me. So from what I can gather, I would say maybe 8 years, 8 to 10 years before the divorce. So it wasn't right away. So it was during that time.
Okay.
And
And,
I suspect his behavior accelerated after the divorce, like it got worse, but I don't know that. Yeah.
and how many people did come up and share with the world that this is what he's done? I mean, was it one, two, three victims, or we're talking about 20 or 30 victims?
Right. So as you probably know, if one victim comes forward, the media tends to get a hold of that, and they want to get the word out in hopes that other victims will come forward, and that's exactly what happened. In the end, I think there were I lost count. It's probably I think seven victims in all, maybe nine. But those were the ones that came forward. I suspect that there are victims that did not come forward, and my heart goes out to them. I they'll I they're very brave for standing up in court and testifying because he didn't plead guilty. He went to trial uh, on all of these, and I think. I didn't go to the trials, I just couldn't. But I think most, if not all, the victims had to testify. So, hats off to them. They were extremely brave and in doing so and in coming forward and sharing their story. So,
So
if there's, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so your book itself, the that you wrote, the Free and Hike. I mean, Live Free and Hike. Is it basically a memoir? But what do you talk about in that book? Is it about your being married with someone who is a child molester, or what the experience you had when you climbed those mountains? I mean, is it a combination of both?
Very factual about what happened in terms of my personal life and my process for processing these crimes and the grief process that I went through, and how these hikes helped me cope with the grief and especially the shame and the sadness. And I also share quite a few uh, tips and advice that I received from both my therapist and my life coach, because without those two, I couldn't have come out the other side.
And so
Yeah, it's a combination of everything. Yeah.
yeah, it is. So how long did it take you to finish the book?
Well, like most people, I magically found the time to finish it during the pandemic.
Oh, yes,
That's
it's very
right.
common. Absolutely. And in this point, do you do like a lot of talks to other women who are going through the similar issue about a toxic marriage or a child molester?
I leave out the child molestation completely out of my talks because I can't talk about it. It's too raw and emotional for me, and it's not about him, right? It's about the journey that I went through. I talk a little bit about my misadventures on the mountains because people like to hear that, right? They like to hear about people getting lost and getting their pants ripped off and sliding down a rock face for 100 yards and all that good stuff. And then I share some like life coach tips, like the importance of having a vision statement and writing affirmations and having goals and how that can help you. I talk about how it's not too late to start over. There's so many, I hear from so many women who tell me, oh, it's too late. And I'm like, no, not too late. I got divorced in my mid 50s, left them, started all over. And if I can do it, you can too. So it's a book, it's a combination of all those things. I enjoy hearing from people who share their stories. That makes me feel good to hear that they've gone through something difficult and have inspired to go hiking.
Now that you've done the 48 mountains, what's your next big challenge, Linda?
Yeah, well, my next big challenge is another list that I'm working on, New Hampshire. It's called 52 with a View, and these are much shorter, doable hikes. They're more family hikes that have amazing views for little effort. So that is my next thing I'm doing. And there's also in the mountains, there's also quite a few airplane crashes where the wreckage is still there. And so I'm going to these crashes and kind of documenting what's there and kind of researching the historical aspect behind it.
Beautiful. So before we conclude the podcast, can you please tell our listeners where can they find your book?
Sure. So if you'd like to write to me, and you can order the book directly from my website, my email address is Linda, Linda, Magoon, Magoon, author, Linda Magoon, author at gmail.com. Or you can visit my website, lindamagoon.com. Or it's available on Amazon, and Barnes and Noble, and where other fine books are sold.
Beautiful. Well, Linda, That is all the time that we have for today's podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time with your busy schedule to join us. And thank you again for participating and inspiring our many listeners with your knowledge and ways in finding grace after surviving toxic relationships. Now, we hope that you've all enjoyed today's episode. And I'm also very excited about the many upcoming guests that we have scheduled for season 26 of the Happiness Journey podcast, filled with inspirational stories just like the one that you listened today. Now, here are some concluding words of wisdom. After many years in a toxic, controlling relationship, you can choose to reclaim your life and find strength. The weight of manipulation and fear no longer defines you, where you can step into grace and power. Fitness can become your sanctuary, a place where you could rebuild not just your body, but your spirit. Every drop of sweat can remind you that you're stronger than your past. With each workout, you shed the pain and embrace the freedom you always meant to have. You are no longer a prisoner of someone else's control. You are the author of your own story. Through discipline and self-love, you can find healing, confidence, and unshakable joy. You are all the proof that it's never too late to rewrite your life. Strength isn't just about muscles. It's about rising after every fall. Today, you can stand tall, empowered, and free. My name is Dr. Dan Amzalak, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life.